Hello, Endersword here again, this time with a Gold League game featuring our Terran player Lix over here in the bottom right corner, and his opponent today is going to be TheEff, our Zerg player over here on the bottom left-hand side of the map. We're going to be focusing on the Terran. Lix had posted this game up on TeamLiquid.net strategy forums and was looking for how to deal with what the Zerg player did in this game. And so we're going to take a look at this and see what improvements can be made on the Terran side that are going to help things out. The three key things that we're going to look at during this game are, number one, macroing and teching up at the right times and the timing that actually makes sense. The second thing is not telegraphing information to your opponent, so not just constantly letting them know what's going on, trying to conceal things, trying to be a little sneaky with what you're doing. And the third thing we're going to look at is just basic positioning when engaging in a fight or when setting up to try and prevent a fight or setting a defensive line or something like that. So we see the Terran player going for a fairly standard wall-off sort of thing here, just making SCVs at home, making a supply depot and barracks. And then, as tends to happen in a lot of games, the scouting drone decides to start harassing this SCV. This is something that people should really get used to just dealing with and making sure that it doesn't really disrupt what you're trying to do. Here, the Terran kind of overreacts, pulls a single SCV off, which is fairly common, but here is about to lose one, so he pulls them both away, ends up losing a lot of time in building this barracks, then sends 3 back out to finish the construction and wall off. That's just a pretty inefficient use. We're losing a lot of mining time there. We're definitely losing time that this could be producing Marines. Very often the drone is doing something like that to try and prevent the wall off from actually finishing and do some early aggression on their own. That's not, in fact, what the Zerg is doing, but we're just now scouting the Zerg base, so we didn't actually know that. So it's really dangerous to have that delayed too much. Someone can definitely take advantage of that and really use it against you. So just pull the one SCV off. If you have to cancel off the barracks and move your SCV, switch it with the other one. Just kind of avoid the drone. Don't overreact, pull everything off, and so on. In the part of telegraphing information, we probably don't want the factory going down where it is here. It's in a place where you could definitely see it. If that drone just comes back up the ramp or anything takes a poke right here up the ramp, it could definitely see the factory. You maybe want to put that a little further in your base so that he has to actually send this overlord in to see it, or it's just missed by something really casual like a poke up the ramp. Instead, this tech lab could easily go on this barracks back here. The factory could go down here. I know he's planning to switch them and put it on. By doing this, you just end with it completely right up front. And again, you're just telling your opponent exactly what you plan to do. He can see what add-on it is. He can see what tech it is. He now knows that there's 0 chance that a Hellion's going to come get him. He also now knows that a heavy Marauder play probably isn't going to be happening just because you're switching out the add-on that you would have needed for that type of build. So just be careful in what information we're actually giving people. The other thing in terms of teching up here, I've seen a lot of people do this. Go for the siege upgrade prior to even starting your first tank. Again, since we don't really know what the Zerg player is doing, it's usually a lot safer to get that tank actually out. If he was going for a quick Baneling bust, if he was going for a Roach bust or something like that, I'd feel more comfortable having the actual siege tech delayed, but having 2 tanks out quicker than I would having the siege tech done and only 1 tank out, which you note he doesn't even actually end up sieging right after the tech is done anyway. So what was the hurry there? You would have been better off actually going and building the units In general, you don't want to be starting an upgrade prior to actually building that unit. There are occasions like Cloak Banshees where you'll be doing it at the same time, but very rarely are you going to upgrade something when there's not literally one out on the field already. That certainly applies to a lot of Protoss players. You'll see them get their first Colossus, but they've actually started their range upgrade well before that, and that's something you want to avoid. You want to actually get it out first, get a couple on the field, and then be teching to it. Otherwise, you're just spending a lot more up front that could be going into defense that you may need. He's moving this army out with no actual scout, and you notice that that was actually on move command. So he ends up losing an awful lot here to an army being pushed out just by not sending a Marine a little bit out ahead, by not being aware of what's actually there on the map. You don't want to come out with a siege tank army blind. You very often want to know a bit about what's ahead of you. Have scouts, your Marines, scouting out in front of that area so that you get an idea whether you have to pull back, whether you have to siege, whether you have to split your force, because by just being in a line like that, particularly in a move command, you definitely never want to be issuing a move command into an area where you don't know what is there, because he ends up walking directly into the banelings and having to react and stop and start to fire, whereas he could have actually prevented a few things from dying, made a few more kills by actually attacking into that and then killing a few things as they close the gap. So that certainly is a fairly big deal. Does get a nice volley off on those lanes. It's very late in the game, given how heavy this army is in just Marines and tanks, to be going for this type of upgrade. I generally like to see the stim pack upgrade before the shield, combat shield upgrade to the Marines, particularly since we know that there are speed banelings, that there are banelings and speedlings out on the field. That stim can often be a lot more useful in pulling away, getting away from the banelings, splitting up appropriately, and letting your siege tanks do a lot of damage. So again, we have another glut of a lot of teching up done at the same time that we're moving out with a fairly weak force into an area that we don't actually know. Luckily, this time he did learn from that mistake and is actually attack moving out into the area. But again, we're just doing this in such a way that he's telegraphing exactly what he's doing. He's making it very apparent by that move out and of everything, as opposed to just one or two Marines taking a look around. By going with his whole force, it's making it very clear, I'm moving my front line forward, I am definitely expanding behind this, this is the time that I've chosen to do it. So the opponent is just not at all in the dark about anything. He's got this overseer here that can see into this side of the base. Again, the positioning on this tech, not hidden at all, made in a very accessible location that he could directly see that. Just nothing hidden at all for the Terran. The Zerg is basically playing with absolute information. He might as well be able to just see the Terran screen or something like that, and you don't want to be in that type of position. In terms of position, since I'm talking about that, this also isn't really the best. It is somewhat of a concave here with the tanks, but this ramp is wide. There's nothing really in front blocking this or anything. Knowing that, again, there are speedlings and banelings out there, and God knows what else at this point, because Lix doesn't really have much information until just now on what was out there. Just now he's starting to scan and see, oh, there's a spire coming, but there's a roach warren out. There's all these things out, and he's not really sure what's out there. Without something in front, without bunkers down, without something to provide cushion to allow the tanks to get a few volleys off before they are absolutely swarmed by this force, there was just nothing to slow that down at all. So tanks that could have been completely effective, I mean, tanks absolutely destroy this type of composition, but they just had no time to actually do that damage. And I'm going to actually rewind over that fight and show a couple key things that a lot of people will miss when they're in this game. Obviously, they see that type of attack and then say to themselves, oh, well, I just got killed by Lings and Banelings. That composition completely countered what I did, and it just rolled over me. So the key things to note here are we're at 70 of 70 supply. He's massively supply blocked. None of these production facilities are able to do anything right now. So when this starts, we're actually quite a bit behind on what we could have produced and used to beef this army up. So this guy's the last thing coming in, and about 30 to 40 seconds actually go by in that supply block state. That would have been enough to get most of another tank out, would have been enough to get more Marines out. Just extra padding to this. The starport is blocked at the time. Probably, I'm not sure what the Viking exactly was for anyway. Maybe just to go snipe overlords, but could have had extra healing in that time. Just there could have been more of a bulk to that fight. And we're just going to take, again, one more look at it and focus on a different aspect this time. A lot of people would look at that and say, well, his composition totally beat my composition. But we're going to look at a couple numbers that are available to us. The 70 supply versus the 74 Zerg supply. And we'll see how that changes over the fight. As well as the units lost tab, resources lost so far by the Terran versus resources lost so far by the Zerg player. So keep an eye on those as we go through this again. The force is not seen right now. We'll see at what point he knows that this is coming. It's about 10 more seconds. But there it is, so he's now aware of it. And throughout that fight, the Terran player has dropped from 70 to 42, so he's lost 28 supply, whereas the Zerg player has lost 25 supply. So that's not actually that imbalanced. That looked like a complete devastating walkover destruction of all your forces. But it shows that that composition, even with no micro, and even with kind of bad positioning and nothing to buffer in front of it and no bunkers down and things like that, still actually held up fairly well against this army. If we look over at the resources, we see that the Terran has lost just under 2,000 resources in that fight. He lost, I guess, 1,975, whereas the Zerg player went from 1150 to 3,475. So the Zerg player lost, what is that, 2,325 resources. The Zerg actually lost almost as much supply and lost more resources than the Terran player did. Imagine that there were just 2 bunkers full of Marines down that were able to absorb these extra 7 Banelings. Imagine that there was just a couple supply depots there or an extra barracks in front of it to hold things off a little more. Imagine that one more tank was able to come out of here. You'll notice his Banelings were just exploding on the tanks. That's not very cost efficient at all. So this fight was definitely winnable with the material we had, and was completely winnable if we had had just a few more things out to hit that critical mass. If these upgrades were done, it could have been a lot different. If this stim upgrade was done, it definitely could have been a lot different. So you don't want to be delaying those. Certainly, if your stim is not done and you're 13 minutes into the game, rethink that build, because that is just such a key upgrade. So anyway, I'll let this play out through the end here. But it kind of just shows that really making sure that you can get out what you can get out in time, making sure that it's in place and actually out of your buildings, not supply blocking yourselves at a very key time, where your supply block 30 or 40 seconds right before that final big battle actually hits. These upgrades are just 20-30 seconds too late. That stim upgrade, just a bit too late. The actual production, just a bit too late. tiny little things could have swayed that entire battle and therefore swayed the entire game. But instead we have a Terran base that's even able to, just to show how close it is, able to actually kind of recover and hold off that force. So he's going to have to come in and reinforce and kill the player again. Obviously he will be able to in a second wave, given that there's really no economy left for the Terran player, whereas the Zerg player is now going on to his third base. That's another key point out there, not for the Terran, but even when you think you won a game, make sure that you continue to expand and continue to macro up. Don't get lazy just because you figure you broke someone's back. People make recoveries, they could have a hidden base, anything like that. So he does obviously finally come in here and clean everything up. But just to review again, the macro throughout the game, make sure that your tech path makes some sense, you've planned it out ahead of time, you're not getting things really late, but also that you're not getting things too early to the point that they're actually preventing you from getting the units out that you need to defend yourself. Positioning is very important, that you want to make sure that you are actually in a good defensive posture. When you're a Terran player, they are very much designed to be excellent turtlers and defenders. So if you're going to be playing that race, that's something you want to be taking advantage of and really perfecting how to do, since it is one of the key points to the entire race. And the third thing is just make sure you're not telegraphing to your opponent exactly what you're going to do at any given time. At no point was the Zerg player in the dark at all. He pretty much knew exactly what was in this base. He knew exactly when the opponent moved out of it. He knew exactly when he was going to expand, knew what composition he was facing perfectly, and was never really at any point of unsureness or confusion about what the Terran was going to do, and was able to simply respond appropriately to it. So make sure that you keep your cards close to your chest and do a few things that are designed to be a little deceptive, or watch the placement of your buildings. So I hope overall this does help. Just a few tweaks there could have absolutely changed the course of the game, and it's definitely something that everyone can work on. Thanks for listening.